Greetings, fellow alchemists, and welcome to Wordplay Wizardry. Last time, we got into some of the finer points of world building. For this episode, we're going to stay in that realm for just a little longer, because we need to discuss character interactions influenced by your world. I touched on this a little bit during the socioeconomic portion of the building process, but I'd like to expand on it. And the reason for that is, now that you have a world, it has ramifications. The things and systems that you have created now have direct effect on your characters. Though, bear in mind that a lot of what we're going to talk about in this episode will unfold over the course of the story. Interactions don't really happen outside the page or before you write. The prejudice is there, just not the specific interactions. Right about now, you may be saying, well, what about all the stuff that happened in a character's past, in their backstory? If there were issues, yes, those do exist. They have to. And they are influenced by the world, but they only exist in part. Now, how is that possible? Well, without flashbacks, we never really see those moments. We only hear about them. But they do shape a character's character. And, more importantly, they lay the groundwork for incidents that we will see. So let's start with some of the more overt points. Race and gender. Do these things matter in your world? Does your character being male or female affect how the world sees them? Does being a specific ethnicity or non-human race affect their standing? The key here is that if you define it outside of the story, you don't then have to implicitly say it within the story. The treatment itself will do that job just fine. Of course, it's also possible to create a world where none of that matters. In Oddity Academy, none of the students carry said animosity. If you're going to the school, you're good. The same cannot be said for anyone outside of the academy. Some of the students interact just fine with the regular folk. Some absolutely do not. Now, I justify this because humans have a long history of not liking what they don't understand. And I highly doubt they could understand a kid with gills or someone who can conjure fire. But among peers and other oddities, the students know they are safe. They are accepted in all aspects of who they are. And yes, this does mean race, gender, and orientation. Who they love, how they identify, and what they look like. It's a tad idyllic, but the idea behind it is they face so much rejection out in the world, it doesn't make any sense not to accept. Imagine being born different. Not wrong, different. And the world at large ridicules you. Yet you find a place with people just like you, all of them different in some way. To me, it just makes sense that if you accept one difference, you should accept all differences. Differences are what make us special, what make us unique. Technically, I suppose everyone is born different. But then shouldn't we accept everyone? The next issue we face is employment. Whether your character is employed or unemployed will dictate how other characters interact with them. Just in the same way that the type of employment will also dictate those interactions. And look, I'm not saying it's right, but those type of things exist in our world all the time. Dirty jobs, see less respect than clean ones. Entry-level jobs get less respect than specialized jobs. The only real exception to any of this are those specialized fields. Say, a blacksmith who takes 5 years to make a blade versus a blacksmith who takes 5 days. With this example, clearly the smith who takes 5 years on a blade would command more respect. His product would demand a higher price. Why? The sword that took years to complete would undoubtedly be of higher quality than the one that took mere days. Therefore, it would be more sought after, and the maker would warrant more respect. By the same token, you may have a silk dressmaker who looks down on a blacksmith, because regardless of how well respected they are and how high quality their product is, to the dressmaker, they spend all day getting sweaty and dirty. But using that example, you can see how profession can create a type of caste tier system within the employed. And society will always cast a disparaging eye on somebody who chooses a less than reputable profession. Thieves, bandits, mercenaries. To many, they are seen as dirty. This view system is also relevant to station or class. Working class or low-income characters are usually less respected. The thing you have to remember when building a world and populating it is a lot of the interactions are going to mirror our own world. The only difference is with a literary context, those interactions are usually exaggerated to some degree. Are people really terrible to each other? What does history have to say on the matter? Are we proud of that history? No, but we still know it, and we still need to know it. We need to know that history, those bad things, those things that we wouldn't like to know, so that we can become better. And your story needs a similar history. Racism, sexism, and classism are not new isms. They're not new concepts, nor are they foreign. And sad to say, you do have to ask, what do they look like in your world? There's a good chance there's something that makes you uncomfortable, that makes your reader. Maybe it hits just a little too close to home, but that also means it's likely accurate. And the truth is, we can't just gloss over the bad. It existed, and it exists. Denying it only highlights its absence. Of course, like the Oddity Academy example, it is possible that none of this exists in your new world. That, for the most part, everyone gets along. The for the most part aspect is likely that there is still prejudice against the less than reputable professions, that there's still animosity towards killers and thieves and rogues, mercenaries. I just want you to be aware that there are 2 paths that you can choose. One where everyone gets along, or one that mirrors our own world, where they don't. And if you're writing in our world, it would serve you well to understand those interactions, to know those prejudices. But let's turn our attention to other concerns. Depending on the size and scope of your world, the available modes of transportation will always influence travel time, how long it takes to get from point A to point B. And there is a way for you to understand this relationship. Go online and access a map feature, be that in an app or the function of the browser itself. Put in a starting point and an end point. Depending on the app, you should get several options. How long it would take to travel by car, by bus, on foot, on bike. The distance will remain the same, but the time will vary. The same will hold true in your world. There is always a limit to how far someone can travel in a day, a week, a month, and it will always come off as false if they can travel faster. Let's say an average character can run a marathon, which is 42 kilometers or 26 miles in a day, in 12 hours. How would it appear if your character could do it in half the time, a quarter of the time? Let's go even further and say a world-class athlete can do that same marathon in the 12 hours, and you have a character who does it in 10. Is that believable? I argue unlikely, in part because the professional athlete would have no additional burdens, aka any weight that they're carrying, whereas your character will undoubtedly be carrying some weight. So just how fit is your character? This is the point where I'll bring up what a professional runner looks like, and it's entirely possible that you've seen them, whether it's online, in a video, in the news, say watching the Olympics. You know how they dress. You know what they look like. They're trying to be as light and as streamlined as possible. In your world, in your story, are your characters or character dressing like that? If you have a fantasy story and they have to trek across the countryside, 100 miles, maybe more, how much do they have to carry? How fast can they do that journey? They leave everything behind and hope they can find supplies wherever they stop. They have to bring something. How much does that something weigh? What will that impede? You may not have to know everything, but you do have to know something. And ask yourself how far you could run if you had a 50-pound bag on your back. How easy would it be to move? These are the things you need to know. These are the parts of your world. These are the items from your world. And now they have consequences. What does carrying them do to your character? Overall, before you begin writing, it's a good idea to understand what everyone within your world and your story thinks of each other. Maybe not specific individuals, especially ones who have never met before, but overall, if you, right now, if you were to meet an unsavory type, a thief, a bandit, what would you think of them? If you were to meet a silk dressmaker, how would you feel about them? And in turn, how would they feel about you? You don't know them. You haven't met them. They haven't met you, but both of you will have thoughts about the other until you sit down and have a conversation. This is what needs to be in your story. Though what it needs to be is in your notes. It needs to be in the building blocks because those relationships will play out within your story, in the dialogue, in the interactions. Every character responds differently to various modifiers. How do they view various professions? How do the characters view other races or other species? Is there still animosity over something that happened 1,000 years ago? Or is it water under the bridge? Forgiven. Depending on the type of story and the setting, these are questions you'll have to bear in mind. Some may become more prominent than others, but they all bear consideration. Think of your new world outside the constraints of your story. When we visit a village or town or city within the story, we see how that location operates. But the characters there don't just freeze in place once the reader's eye is not on them. They still have lives. In video games, there's a process or phenomenon called frustum culling. In it, the full world exists, but the game only renders what is directly in and immediately outside the player's vision. Something like this. It's a way of not overloading the processing needed to run advanced games. But in literature, you can't operate via cone of vision alone. Say you have a town, and we'll use the one from Oddity Academy, New Bay. In all fairness, that town doesn't get a lot of focus because we don't spend a lot of time there. However, the point here is that the citizens of New Bay will go about their lives regardless of what's happening at the academy. Sonder. The realization that everyone, from the person 10,000 miles away to the random person you see in the store in your town, has a life that is as deep and complex as your own, regardless of whether or not you see it. Sonder. Every author needs to understand Sonder, because that's what happens in your story. Everyone, everywhere, has a life, has things that are special and have meaning, has a job, has a purpose, and they will continue their lives, even when not seen. If you have created a living world, it will continue to live and thrive, whether we see it or not. And on that existential note, we'll bring this episode to a close. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, if you'd like to see me expand on something, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're enjoying what you watch, leave a comment. Until next time, fellow alchemists, take care.